Number 13. Shandon Scott. By the time he turned 31 years old, Terence Trent Voss had a rap sheet spanning more than half his life. As a long-standing member of Salt Lake City's Black Mafia gangster Street Gang, his prior convictions consisted of drive-by shootings, aggravated assaults, robberies, weapons charges, witness tampering, and more. Consequently, Voss spent his adolescent and adult years in and out of prison. In 2020, he was granted compassionate release, which is typically given to terminally ill prisoners, but was extended to Voss following his daughter's murder. But just weeks later, he was caught driving under the influence and was sent back to prison to continue serving his original sentence. During a parole hearing 2 months later, Voss blamed his decision to drive intoxicated on the stress and grief he was experiencing after losing his daughter. According to court documents, he insisted that he didn't act out of a deliberate disrespect for the law. The parole board sympathized with Voss, and by then, the COVID-19 pandemic was plaguing America's prisons. So once again, he was released early. Voss failed to comply with the terms of his parole, though, which included an in-person visit at least once every 2 months. Parole officers made multiple failed attempts to visit Voss's home. On one occasion, nobody answered the door, even though his ankle monitor showed that he was inside. Another time, the officers noticed bullet holes in the siding of Voss's house. Voss also waited several weeks to report a police encounter to his parole officer, which parolees in Utah are required to do within 48 hours, even when no arrests are made. Given his violent history, the accumulation of red flags was troubling, yet the probation and parole department continuously failed to treat the situation with urgency. Then, in January 2021, Voss's girlfriend Shandon Scott reported him to the police for assaulting her. She was visibly injured and scared, and said that she was worried Voss would hurt her family. Scott further claimed that Voss had broken her legs months earlier, but that she didn't report him because she was afraid he would kill her. By the time a warrant was issued for Voss's arrest, the GPS on his ankle monitor had stopped working and he was nowhere to be found. During his several months on the run, Scott was found dead in a car with multiple gunshot wounds along a highway. According to authorities, Voss shot his girlfriend, then deliberately crashed the car before fleeing on foot. As a result, he was charged with aggravated murder and will hopefully remain behind bars this time. But as of now, the case is ongoing. Number 12. Brianna Kinnear. Carol Kinnear from Canada didn't tiptoe around things when it came to her disapproval of her 21-year-old daughter's gangster boyfriend, Jesse Margeson. Brianna Kinnear had received a conditional sentence for a drug trafficking charge, which gave her an opportunity to clean up her record by staying out of trouble. But Brianna continued to date Jesse, and by early 2009, Carol was at her wit's end with the situation. After trying to be patient, the concerned mother mentioned in a text message to her daughter that maybe some tough love was in order. Carol later told the Vancouver Sun that she would have never disowned Brianna, but that she was considering taking a more hard-lined approach to her daughter's wayward relationship. Sadly, just hours after the conversation, Brianna was shot to death outside Vancouver, British Columbia, in the city of Coquitlam. She was with Jesse at the time and was driving a vehicle owned by another young woman named Tiffany Bryan. Police initially weren't sure which one of the three were the intended target of the gunfire, but they speculated that the incident may have been connected to 3 other shooting deaths that happened over a year-long span beginning in early 2008. Police sources told CBC News that the 4 victims were connected with Jesse Margeson and another gangster named Troy Dax McKinnon. They were all allegedly street-level drug dealers who often worked with or for gangs, but weren't fully fledged members themselves. Speaking with the Vancouver Sun the following year, Carol Kinnear said that Brianna thought dating a gangster made her immune to violence, but in reality, it was most likely what led to her death. According to Police Corporal Dale Carr, drug dealers who worked at the group's level could land in bad situations if they failed to pay back their higher-ups for lost product. One of the victims had told a relative the night before his death that he had lost money he owed to someone and that he was in trouble. For Carol Kinnear, Brianna's death was a warning to other young women about the dangers of dating gangsters and a false sense of security that often comes along with it. For the cops, the four murders spoke to the risks of getting involved with the illegal drug trade. Brianna's murder remains unsolved to this day. For at least a decade afterward, Carol put an annual notice in the local newspaper on the anniversary of her daughter's death, urging anyone with information to come forward to law enforcement. But unfortunately, it's still unclear whether Brianna was the target of the shooting or if she simply got caught in the crosshairs of gang violence. Number 11. Haley Grisham. LAPD officer Fernando Arroyas had a promising future to look forward to. He began his law enforcement career in 2019 after graduating with honors from UC Berkeley and started saving to buy a home right away. 3 years later, in early 2022, he and his girlfriend began house hunting. While out looking at homes one afternoon, the couple stopped to take some pictures of a property that was for sale. But then, out of nowhere, a pickup truck pulled up to the pair. 4 individuals spilled out of the vehicle and attempted to rob them. Arroyas tried to defend himself and his girlfriend, but gunfire broke out and he was fatally shot. Federal authorities arrested 22-year-old Ernesto Gonzo Cisneros, 34-year-old Jesse Contreras, and 29-year-old Luis Alfredo de la Rosa Rios, who were all allegedly members of the Florencia 13 or F13 street gang. They also arrested Rios's girlfriend, 18-year-old Haley Marie Grisham, who wasn't a full-fledged member but had connections with the gang dating back to 2021. All 4 suspects were charged with violent crime in aid of racketeering. Prosecutors described F13 as a multi-generational street gang that previously has been the subject of federal prosecutions, including 2 large racketeering cases. The murder happened on the gang's turf in the Florencia neighborhood of South Los Angeles. U.S. attorneys accused the defendants of targeting Arroyas because he was wearing gold chains and claimed that the group committed the crime to increase and maintain position within the F13 gang. It's reportedly not uncommon for young members to carry out these types of crimes in a bid to gain points with their higher-ups. Arroyos' mother, Claudia Membreno, struggled to wrap her mind around the fact that someone took her only child's life away over a $200 piece of jewelry. She later told Fox LA that her son had always dreamed of becoming a police officer and that she tried to talk him out of it because of the dangers, only for him to ironically be killed when he was off duty. Haley Marie Grisham wasn't accused of firing the fatal bullet, but she was nevertheless held accountable for her participation in the crime. She pleaded guilty in exchange for having the death penalty taken off the table, but could still face life in prison. The other 3 cases are ongoing. Number 10. Tia Maria Jane Landers. After losing everything she owned to a series of catastrophic floods that struck Queensland, Australia in 2011, Tia Maria Jane Landers moved to Brisbane to start her life over from scratch. But just 3 years later, the 28-year-old mother of 4 vanished. Tia was last seen at a gas station about 2 weeks before she was reported missing. A month earlier, she'd failed to appear in court for her alleged role in a violent home robbery that she was accused of committing with her boyfriend, Wade Bartz. As a career criminal for much of his adult life, Bartz was no stranger to life behind bars. In fact, he was a member of a notorious jailhouse group of criminals called the Angry Gang. During past prison stints, he'd become infamous for breaking out of penitentiaries, using bolt cutters, having affairs with staff members, and other deviant stunts he pulled to show just how bad he was. So when Tia went missing, it was only natural for authorities to have a heightened concern for her safety, and for several reasons. In addition to her relationship with a known violent criminal, the young woman suffered from schizophrenia and relied on antipsychotic medication. Without it, she became mentally unstable. Tia's family was also worried about her, and in a Facebook post, the troubled woman's sister pleaded with Tia to return home and reminded her that she was loved regardless of her past. At the time, the family believed that Tia had run off because she thought it was best for them if she stayed away, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Several days after Tia was reported missing, her body was found in a shallow grave in a remote area. It was clear, based on her multitude of injuries and a plastic bag around her head, that she'd suffered an excruciating death. The horrific crime was carried out at the home of a drug-dealing couple in their 40s named John Edward Harris and Linda Eileen Appleton. Tia went to the house voluntarily along with two male friends to discuss a potential drug sale. The conversation went south, however, when Appleton accused Tia of stealing jewelry from her in the past. For 6 grueling hours, Harris and Appleton tormented Tia, forcing her two friends to watch at gunpoint as they hacked her ankles, head, and other parts of her body with knives, a sword, and a machete. The sadistic pair then took Tia into another room and shot her twice in the head. They released her friends and then drove to a state park where they buried her body in the bushland. As it turned out, Tia's gangster boyfriend had nothing to do with her murder. But Bart clearly wasn't the only career criminal she was hanging out with, nor was he the most hardened. Both Harris and Appleton had violent histories, and Harris's track record in particular made Bart's rap sheet seem mild. In fact, this wasn't his first time killing. By the time the couple murdered Tia, Harris already had a manslaughter conviction under his belt for fatally shooting his former roommate back in 1999. He served 10 years for the crime, which bore eerie similarities to Tia's murder. Halfway through their trial, Harris and Appleton decided to plead guilty. They each received a life sentence with a minimum of 27 years for Harris and 23 years for Appleton. For Tia's family, it was a far cry from justice, but no amount of punishment would ever feel fair. Instead, they decided to focus on making sure that Tia was remembered, not for her gruesome death or the wayward lifestyle she got caught up in, but for her kind and fun-loving personality and her passion for life. Number 9. Lenise Escobar. Nicknamed La Diablita, or Little Devil, Lenise Escobar was the girlfriend of Jeffrey Amador, a high-ranking MS-13 member from Long Island, New York, who went by the moniker Cruel. In 2017, she lured 5 young men to a park in central Islip to smoke marijuana. When they arrived, it quickly became clear that they'd walked right into a trap. One of the victims managed to escape by hopping a nearby fence and running for his life, but the other 4 were ruthlessly hacked and bludgeoned to death by machete, axe, and club-wielding MS-13 members. The killers then dragged the victims' mutilated remains to a more isolated area and stacked the bodies before fleeing the scene. And it wasn't until the next evening that the corpses were discovered. More than a dozen MS-13 members, including Escobar, were federally charged in connection with the horrific crime following an investigation. Detectives theorized that the murdered victims were rival gang members, which their families denied, and that they disrespected MS-13 on social media. Escobar was accused of orchestrating the massacre in a bid to gain brownie points with MS-13. The lone survivor, Elmer Alexander Antigua Ruiz, had posted a photo of himself making the hand signs of MS-13 and a rival gang on social media. Prosecutors told the court that he wasn't a real gang member, but just a teen trying to gain street cred. In the days following the murders, Escobar allegedly bragged to multiple people about her role in the crime. She was also seen disposing of a bloody sweatshirt from the scene and throwing her cell phone out of a car window in an effort to destroy evidence while being followed by police. But this didn't stop investigators from obtaining her cell phone records, which revealed that she told her boyfriend, who wasn't present during the crime, that 4 individuals took the train and were seeing the light and never coming back. According to prosecutors, this was a coded reference to the murders. Escobar's defense attorney argued that his client didn't know anyone was going to be killed at the park that night. He also claimed that her statement to Amador wasn't a confession, but the pivots of a scared young woman who was in danger. In the end, Escobar was found guilty of all counts, including racketeering and 4 murder charges. Her sentence was never announced, but the U.S. Department of Justice revealed shortly after her conviction that she'd been spared the death penalty and was looking at life in prison. Number 8. Mercedes Williamson. Statistics show that transgender individuals experience staggering levels of violence compared to the cisgender population. A young transgender woman from Alabama named Mercedes Williamson became a victim of this disproportionately high brutality in 2015 when she was killed at the hands of her ex-boyfriend. Long before her murder, Williamson had dated 28-year-old Joshua Brandon Valum, a high-ranking member of the Latin Kings from neighboring Mississippi. Throughout the entire relationship, Valum kept his girlfriend's transgender status secret from everyone in his life, including his friends, family, and fellow gang members. Williamson knew that her relationship with Valum was risky, since it was considered homosexual under the gang's bylaws and therefore strictly forbidden. During a conversation with her roommate, the aspiring cosmetologist even acknowledged that both she and Valum could be killed if the gang discovered that she was biologically male. But the relationship ended without them finding out, and it didn't seem like there was anything to worry about. After 8 months of no contact, Valum reached out to Williamson for a booty call and offered to pick her up. She agreed to it, but became suspicious that she was being set up when Valum drove her into Mississippi. So, as it turned out, she had every reason to worry. Valum drove Williamson to his father's property in the town of Loosedale, and before she had a chance to escape, he shocked her with a stun gun, then stabbed and bludgeoned her to death with a knife and a hammer. He covered her body up with some brush, then tossed the murder weapons and the victim's cell phone off a bridge. After Williamson's body was found, investigators were quick to zero in on Valum as their prime suspect. During questioning, he claimed that he killed Williamson in a panic after discovering during a makeout session that she was transgender, an argument commonly known as the trans panic defense. This was a lie, according to Williamson's roommate, who knew that the former couple had been intimate throughout their relationship. Valum eventually confessed that he knew Williamson was transgender and that he decided to kill her after one of his friends found out. He also admitted that he killed Williamson because of her transgender status and pleaded guilty to one count of violating the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. It was the first murder of a transgender person to be successfully prosecuted under the Act, which was signed into law in 2009. The court sentenced Valum to 49 years in prison. There's no parole in the federal system, which means he'll have to serve the entire term behind bars. At his sentencing hearing, Valum plainly admitted to the crime and told the judge that he'd started receiving treatment for bipolar disorder. He sang a suspiciously different tune, though, during a 2017 Jailhouse interview with the true crime series Love and Hate Crime, during which he reverted back to his original claim that he didn't know Williamson was transgender until the day he killed her. Valum said that he lost control and couldn't stop once he started attacking Williamson. Viewers who believe Valum is guilty were disappointed that he was no longer taking full accountability for his actions, and some might even say that it was a waste of an interview. But the show's director, Ben Steele, told the Daily Beast that the content is there for the viewer to think about and decide whether Valum has truly come to terms with his own identity as well as his actions. Number 7. Aryan Sisters. In August 2007, an Aryan Brotherhood of Texas member named David Mitchemore, or Super Dave, and his girlfriend Christy Rochelle Brown were murdered in the city of Nacogdoches over an outstanding debt to a general named Carl Carver. The slaying was apparently carried out by a fellow member named Brent Stalsby under Carver's direct order. This was a fairly standard assignment within the Aryan Brotherhood, which is known for disciplining its disobedient members through threats, murder, robbery, and other violent crimes. The gang has a strict policy that requires lower-ranking members to do as they're told by their superiors. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Stalsby may have executed the hit, but numerous people were involved in orchestrating the double homicide. His wife, Terry, admitted to being present when Carver issued the direct order to kill the victims. Another Aryan Brotherhood associate named April Flanagan, a known meth addict with an explosive temper, approved of the plan to kill Brown and Mitchemore. She provided Brent Stalsby with the shotgun that was used in the crime and also loaned her vehicle for the purpose of carrying out the murders. Authorities charged Brent Stalsby with one federal count of committing a violent crime in aid of racketeering activity. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison for the crime. Terry Stalsby pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 13.5 years behind bars. April Flanagan pleaded guilty to violent crime in aid of racketeering activity, conspiracy to murder, and accessory after the fact. And as a result, she received a 15-year prison sentence. Number 6. Ricardo Maradin. Hailing from the coastal town of Matinho in Brazil's Paraná state, Camila Maradin was a fashion model and social media influencer by day. But she allegedly had a much more lucrative gig behind the scenes as the leader of a powerful drug cartel. Authorities initially suspected Camila's husband Ricardo of being the cartel's leader. That all changed though in November 2021 when he was shot dead during the couple's son's birthday party. The party was almost over when someone pulled up in a silver Volkswagen and mercilessly gunned Ricardo down in cold blood. During police questioning, Camila denied that Ricardo was involved in the drug trade and chalked his murder up to a case of mistaken identity. Further investigation led detectives to suspect that Camila had masterminded her husband's assassination. And while they still believed that Ricardo was involved in the drug trade, they accused Camila of running the cartel alongside her husband. They also believed that she had plans to take the operation over after Ricardo's murder, earning her the nickname of Trafigata, which means pierced in English. Armed with a warrant, law enforcement went to Camila's house to arrest her, only to discover that she'd gone on the lam. Authorities caught up with her near her mother's house after she allegedly went there to hide a handgun. Camila and 14 other suspected cartel members were arrested in the case. And in addition to Ricardo's murder, they're accused of killing 2 policemen named Tiago Cesar Carvalho and Guilherme Antonio da Costa. The cops were killed in the city of Curitiba 3 days after Ricardo's death. One of the officers knew Ricardo, but it's unclear whether the murders were directly related. Police spokesman Colonel Barroso told the media that the group was already under investigation and the arrests were already planned before the murders. In fact, authorities had been eyeing the suspects for about a year as part of a crime-fighting effort codenamed Operation Ostentation. But once the killings occurred, the arrests became urgent and were carried out sooner than planned. Throughout the investigation, military police discovered payments to Camila's bank account totaling 1.3 million Brazilian reais. A court froze the account and the group's assets, which included 13 luxury properties valued as high as 3 million reais each. Authorities also seized 5 luxury cars, more than 3 dozen weapons, and a large amount of cash. Camila was freed from custody on an ankle monitor while awaiting the next steps in her case. She and her friend Paulo Sergio Veiga were returning home from food shopping one day in May 2022 when someone opened fire on the pair. Veiga was hospitalized and Camila luckily walked away unscathed. They were both incredibly lucky to survive. The shooter, Giovanni Soares, was sentenced to 31 years in prison. During his court proceedings, Camila claimed that she had no idea why Soares targeted her and Veiga. When asked if her husband was a drug dealer, she said she didn't know and that she'd learned a lot of surprising things about Ricardo after his death. Camila also continued to deny that she ran a cartel, claiming that the lavish life she portrayed on social media was all financed with borrowed money. The case is ongoing, so unfortunately, Camila has yet to receive her sentencing. Number 5. Genesis Escobar. A 21-year-old mother-to-be from Chicago named Genesis Escobar was 7 months pregnant when she lost her life to senseless violence in early 2023. Working with several armed accomplices, including the father of her unborn child, the young woman got into someone's car in the city's Belmont-Cragen neighborhood and attempted to rob them during a drug deal. The encounter quickly escalated into gunfire between the parties, and Escobar was shot multiple times in broad daylight. Before speeding off, the opposing group dumped the gravely injured expectant mother onto the pavement and covered her with cash, most likely to send a message. And to make matters even more disturbing, Escobar's boyfriend allegedly grabbed a handful of money off the injured young woman and fled the scene, leaving her to die in an intersection. Family friend Iris Alvarez, who lives nearby, told News 4 that Escobar texted her daughter shortly before the botched robbery, pleading for help. But Iris's daughter was sleeping at the time and didn't immediately respond to the messages. A few minutes later, residents found Escobar in the street struggling to breathe. Good Samaritans rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late to save her or her baby. To Alvarez, it didn't really matter if Escobar played a role in the bungled robbery that was being committed when she was shot. Speaking with News 4, she said that only a heartless individual could shoot another human in cold blood, especially one carrying a child. The investigation into the case is ongoing, and for the time being, the suspects remain at large. Number 4. Tanya Smith. Dennis Clem was a member of a white supremacist gang called the Aryan Circle, while his girlfriend Tanya Smith had connections with the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The pair met in 2005 and bonded over their shared interest in drugs, tattoos, and racism. That same year, the couple were arrested by federal authorities while crossing over into the US from Mexico with a gun and a large amount of marijuana. Tanya Smith was convicted of possession of marijuana with intent to distribute, while Clem pleaded guilty to being a felon in possession of a firearm. They each served a short prison term and were reunited upon their release. Smith and Clem weren't supposed to associate with one another while on parole, but they saw each other anyway. Even after being warned by her probation officer multiple times to stay away from Clem, Smith continued to see him. In fact, she went a step further and moved in with him at his father's home in Houston while lying about her address to her PO. The couple were still on parole when a gunfight broke out at Clem's residence in July of 2007, leaving one of his friends wounded. Clem fired back at the shooter's vehicle, killing 2 young African-American men. Knowing it was only a matter of time before law enforcement found out about the double homicide, Smith and Clem packed their belongings and hit the road. They embarked on a Bonnie and Clyde-like interstate crime spree that would eventually bring their gang participation in the free world to a screeching halt. After finding the house empty, Clem's cousin called Smith, who instructed her to dispose of the murder weapon and threatened that the same thing would happen to the cousin if she ran her mouth. During subsequent phone calls with his cousin and an uncle, Clem made it abundantly clear that he wasn't going back to prison, stating that he was going to go out in a blaze. A large-scale manhunt ensued, during which the fugitive couple managed to evade law enforcement twice thanks to a police scanner they had with them. At some point, Clem contacted a friend in Louisiana named Alex Brendel and asked for help. Brendel rented the couple a room in the city of Bastrop at a hotel that was conveniently located across the street from the local police department. At the time, Bastrop police were looking to speak with Brendel about an unrelated incident. After learning that he'd rented a room at the motel, detectives headed over there and knocked on the door, unaware that Brendel was harboring 2 fugitives. The door opened and the detectives entered, but moments later, they ran out of the room as the sound of gunshots rang out. Clem stood in the open doorway and continued to spray the detectives with bullets until they both collapsed to the ground. He then went back into the room and shut the door while Smith fled the scene in a panic. While police and paramedics tended to the fallen detectives, Clem once again emerged from the room, this time with 2 guns in his hand, and began shooting indiscriminately at the first responders. Officers returned fire, killing Clem at the scene. Both of the detectives he targeted died from their injuries, and 2 paramedics were injured by gunshots as well. 2 days later, a fugitive task force tracked Smith down at a trailer park in Texas, where she was hiding out. When they arrived, she said, "You're lucky I didn't know you were coming this time." Smith was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, along with an array of drug and gun-related crimes. She was convicted of all counts and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in the Louisiana state prison system. Number 3. Tessa Penalver. In Great Britain, a high-tech group of criminals known as the Gone in 60 Seconds Gang used professional locksmith devices to steal more than 120 cars over a 2-year period, starting in 2015. They typically targeted keyless Range Rovers, Mercedes-Benzes, and BMWs that were worth as much as £60,000 each, and sold the vehicles on the black market. And to evade suspicion, the gang fled crime scenes in getaway cars that were disguised as hired taxis. The devices, which enabled the gang to reprogram the locks on the stolen vehicles, were obtained by a woman from Essex named Tessa Penalver, who traveled to Bulgaria to pick them up at the urging of her boyfriend, gang member Manjit Sandhu. She also laundered over £120,000 of the gang's ill-gotten funds through her personal bank account despite being on low-income public assistance. While investigating the gang's money trail, police realized that Sandhu didn't have a bank account, which led them to discover that a suspiciously large amount of funds had traveled through Penelva's account. She'd also made numerous payments on Sandhu's behalf, including to the company that the gang got the lock programming devices from. There was no possible legitimate explanation for the source of the money, and in 2016 authorities charged Penelva, Sandhu and at least 5 others in connection with the car-stealing operation. Penelva claimed that she didn't know her boyfriend was committing crimes and accused Sandhu of keeping his shady activities a secret from her throughout their relationship. And while her explanation may have held some water in court, it failed to get her off the hook entirely. The defendants were all convicted of various crimes and were collectively sentenced to more than 46 years in prison. Sandhu received a 12-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit burglary and conspiracy to steal. Penelva was found guilty of perverting the course of justice and transferring criminal property. But because she didn't participate directly in the car thefts, she received the lightest sentence out of all the defendants and was jailed for just 15 months. The judge also based the young woman's sentence on her lack of prior convictions, as well as his belief that Penelva was naive and acted under the influence of her boyfriend, who was a seasoned criminal. Number 2. Karen Ruiz. In a chilling act of violence that was captured on camera, a 31-year-old mother named Karen Ruiz was shot dead in the driveway of a home in Pacoima, California, just days into 2021. The merciless slaying happened during a custody exchange with her daughter's father, 46-year-old Herbert Nixon Flores, who was a member of the notoriously violent MS-13 gang. Surveillance footage showed Ruiz running toward the front door of the house and screaming for help as Flores ran up to her and fired 6 shots at her. Bystanders could be heard screaming in horror as they witnessed the bloodshed. Flores fled the scene and hightailed it out of California, sparking a large-scale manhunt. And as it turned out, he had a history of domestic violence and had been stalking Ruiz in the months leading up to her murder. LAPD detective Sharon Kim told local station KTLA that Ruiz had filed multiple reports against Flores over a several-year period, and shortly before her death, she'd taken out a restraining order against her ex. The FBI tracked him down in Arlington, Texas, where he was hiding out at a relative's home. Armed with a warrant for murder and several other charges, law enforcement waited until he left the residence and then swarmed his car as he drove toward Dallas. Instead of manning up and facing justice for his actions, Flores chose another way out and died at the scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Number 1. Jennifer Caridad. 24-year-old Jennifer Caridad was last seen leaving her house in Sunnyside, Washington on the evening of August 8, 2021. She told her younger brother Marco that she would be back later, but she never returned home. Marco texted his sister and grew increasingly concerned as the hours passed without any response. The next day, Jennifer's SUV was found abandoned at Bergland Lake in Yakima, roughly 35 miles from her home. Some of the young woman's clothing was found nearby, and there was blood on the vehicle's interior, but Jennifer was nowhere to be seen, causing her family to fear the worst. The Caridads told News Nation Now that Jennifer had become completely consumed with her unemployed boyfriend of 8 months, 26-year-old Aurelio Escobar. Jennifer's brother Luis said that he wasn't afraid of Escobar, but that he got weird vibes from the young man who moved in with the family earlier that summer. In his own words, Luis said, "I didn't want to be involved with him." Shortly after Jennifer's disappearance, the Caridads learned that Escobar was a documented member of the Norteño street gang. Law enforcement then launched a search for Jennifer, and in the meantime, Escobar allegedly went on a multi-state crime spree, starting at the site where her deserted SUV was found. He carjacked a man at Bergland Lake, then proceeded to carjack or attempt to carjack several more victims in multiple towns in Washington and Oregon. 3 days after Jennifer vanished, Escobar was apprehended in Medford, Oregon following a shootout with police. He refused to provide any information on Jennifer's whereabouts, and she remained missing for the next 9 months. Without a body or any direct evidence of foul play on Escobar's behalf, authorities lacked enough evidence to charge him in connection with his girlfriend's disappearance. But they were at least able to hold him in custody on the litany of other charges he faces in various places, including first-degree robbery, first-degree assault, drive-by shooting, and a gun charge stemming from the carjacking at Bergland Lake. In Oregon, he was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder, eluding unauthorized use of a vehicle, multiple weapon-related counts, reckless endangerment, and reckless driving. Finally, in late May 2022, a farm worker discovered a human skull in Granger, Washington. It was confirmed to belong to Jennifer, marking a step in her devastated family's quest for answers, while at the same time crushing their hope that she might still be alive. The rest of her body hasn't been found, despite an extensive search of the area. Her cause of death was ruled a homicide, but no charges have been brought forward in the case. Jennifer's mom, Lenore Vargas, told NBC Right Now reporter Jessica Perez that she wished she'd been able to help her daughter. She said she had no doubt that Escobar killed Jennifer, and that she hoped her daughter's story would serve as a cautionary tale to other young women about the dangers of staying in an abusive relationship. Jennifer's family couldn't exactly pinpoint what bothered them about Escobar at first, but they found him off-putting. Number 17, Surpreet Dillon. In early 2022, 33-year-old Saul Murray posted photos of himself wearing Rolex watches on Instagram, and just weeks later, a neighbor entered his apartment building in the English town of Luton and found a father of 6 lying naked in a pool of blood. Someone had stabbed him in the leg, severing his femoral artery and causing him to fatally bleed out. 2 women, later identified as 35-year-old Surpreet Dillon and 21-year-old Temidayo Orr, were seen leaving the building on surveillance footage. They were followed by 29-year-old Cleon Brown and 31-year-old Ikram Afia, who appeared to have a large knife in his hand. Investigators uncovered further evidence that the 4 suspects spent weeks planning the deadly robbery. According to prosecutors, Surpreet Dillon reached out to Murray shortly after he posted the Instagram photos showing off his Rolex. The women were accused of using their feminine wiles to gain entry into the victim's home, where they slipped GHB into his wine to knock him out. Swabs from both sides of the victim's face contained both women's DNA, indicating that they seduced him as part of their plan to make off with his valuables. All 4 suspects were convicted of conspiring to rob Murray. Afia was found guilty of murder, as well as possession of the knife that was used to kill the victim, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. The other 3 suspects were convicted of manslaughter and received prison sentences ranging from 7 to 10 years. Number 16, Viviana Leilani Bruno. Lured by the promise of intimacy, a San Antonio man willingly got into 20-year-old Viviana Leilani Bruno's car when she picked him up one day in April 2019. They had met multiple times before, and nothing about the upcoming visit seemed off. The young woman drove to a local park where she told the man to wait in the back seat while she grabbed some protection out of her trunk. But after she exited the vehicle, a pair of men approached the car and ambushed the unsuspecting gentleman. Armed with a shotgun and brass knuckles, they proceeded to brutally beat the victim, while Bruno allegedly sat in the front seat and paid little mind to the violence. The suspect stole the victim's keys and cell phone, and by the time he got home, someone had entered his apartment and stolen his money. According to police, the victim identified Bruno from a photo lineup as the suspect who he believed had tricked him into getting robbed. Bruno was arrested on suspicion of aggravated robbery and was released on $20,000 bail. It's unclear whether the other 2 suspects were ever arrested, and the outcome of Bruno's case is also a mystery. However, records show that she's not currently incarcerated in Texas. Number 15, Stefania Tanica. In recent years, a group of women nicknamed the Rolex Rippers committed dozens of thefts across the United Kingdom. They primarily targeted wealthy men who lived in upscale neighborhoods where they approached their victims and tried to hug and grab them in a seemingly seductive or flirtatious fashion. It didn't always work though. One of the women, Romanian national Stefania Tânică, was pushed away by a targeted victim in Cheshire in 2021 during a cross-country 5-month crime spree she committed with an unidentified accomplice. Simon Kelly fought back and called the police, who obtained Tânică DNA from his wrist. But by the time law enforcement identified Tânică as the suspect, she'd left the area and was nowhere to be found. Tânică struck again 4 months later in Dorset, where she accosted a 75-year-old retiree in a golf club parking lot. The man pushed her away, but she still managed to run off with his £15,930 Rolex, which was never recovered. Thankfully, though, police finally located and arrested Tânică 6 months later. Authorities may never know how many thefts she committed, but she was convicted in these 2 cases and received a nearly 3.5-year prison sentence for robbery and attempted robbery. In the meantime, the Rolex rippers remain as notorious as ever and are no longer known as an exclusively female gang. They've also started resorting to more blatantly aggressive robbery tactics, including simply taking high-end watches from their victims by force. Number 14. Gemma Frost. 23-year-old Gemma Frost wasted no time asking Christopher Stanley for a £210 loan after they connected on a dating site in 2020. Stanley willingly lent the money to Frost, but when she asked if he would also let her friend borrow some funds, he refused. Instead of letting Stanley know that she was angry, Frost convinced him that she was interested in meeting face-to-face for a date. She then picked him up at his home in Cardiff, Wales, and suddenly pulled over in a residential area as 2 suspicious-looking masked men approached the vehicle. Stanley later described how the men opened the passenger side door of the car and tried to force him into the back seat while threatening to kill him. He fought back and managed to escape on foot, while the thieves left the scene with Frost in her vehicle. Later that same day, Frost allegedly called Stanley on the phone and acted as if nothing had happened. Police arrested Frost, who eventually provided the names of her accomplices. There wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges against the men, but Frost ended up pleading guilty to a conspiracy to kidnap charge. During her sentencing, she claimed that she committed the crime at a low point in her life, which drew her to hang out with the wrong crowd. Frost claimed that her co-conspirators had forced her to participate in the crime after hearing that Stanley had loaned her money. In the end, the judge spared her from prison time, but made it clear that she should feel ashamed of her actions. Number 13. Valerie Rosario. After some initial flirting on Instagram in early 2022, a 24-year-old New York man agreed to visit 22-year-old Valerie Rosario at an apartment in the Bronx. Just moments after being welcomed inside and offered a drink, he was ambushed and pistol-whipped by 3 masked men who stormed into the apartment without warning. The victim suffered in agony over a 24-hour period while the attackers doused him with a flammable liquid and set him on fire, beat him up, stabbed him, and forced him to FaceTime a family member to communicate their demand for a $100,000 ransom. Then, to show that they were serious, one of the attackers cut the man with a knife and threatened to kill him if the relative didn't pay. After being alerted to the kidnapping by the victim's family, NYPD detectives raced against the clock to track down the suspects and hopefully rescue the man. They traced one of the alleged accomplices, Javier Vargas, to an address in Queens, where they spotted him sitting in a van. In the back of the vehicle, they found a victim clinging to life, unconscious and barely breathing, with duct tape over his nose and mouth. Vargas was charged with robbery, kidnapping, assault, and unlawful imprisonment, and authorities charged Rosario and a 3rd suspect, Michael Candelario, with kidnapping, attempted murder, robbery, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. Prosecutors believe that the suspect targeted the victim because he displayed obvious signs of wealth on social media. In 2023, Rosario pleaded guilty to attempted assault and kidnapping. She was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, plus 5 years of probation, and by taking a plea deal, she avoided the possibility of up to 25 years in prison. Javier Vargas also took a plea deal and received a 10-year prison sentence. Michael Candelario took his chances on a jury trial and was convicted of kidnapping, robbery, and other charges, but he appears to be awaiting sentencing. Number 12. Elliot and Miranda Barber. In November 2013, the murdered body of a 42-year-old Pennsylvania man named Troy LaFerrara was found in a backyard in Sunbury, roughly 100 miles outside of Philadelphia. Unfortunately for the victim, he'd been strangled and stabbed to death. LaFerrara's last cell phone call was traced to newlyweds Elliot and Miranda Barber, who had recently moved to the area from North Carolina. Miranda, who was 18 years old at the time, initially denied knowing the victim, but eventually she admitted that she and LaFerrara had driven around together and claimed that she stabbed him because he groped and choked her. Miranda said she then went to the store and bought cleaning supplies which were used to clean out her car, before picking Elliot up and taking him to a strip club for his birthday. But this version of events didn't match the story Elliot gave to police during his interrogation. The 22-year-old told investigators that Miranda was a hired companion who offered her services on Craigslist. He denied that his wife engaged in any activities that would qualify as prostitution and insisted that men paid Miranda simply for her companionship. But that's what a lot of people say when they're under scrutiny by law enforcement, and detectives found Elliot's claims highly questionable. Miranda would later admit that she'd arranged to do a specific act with LaFerrara in exchange for $100. When asked about what really happened that night, Elliot admitted that he and Miranda had purposely baited the victim with a Craigslist ad offering companionship. He said that he hid under a blanket in the back seat while Miranda drove to pick up LaFerrara. Once the unsuspecting target was in the car, Elliot wrapped a cord around his neck from behind, while Miranda stabbed him 20 times. He took credit for buying the cleaning supplies afterward, and surveillance footage corroborated his claim. Miranda eventually dropped her story about stabbing LaFerrara in self-defense and confessed, admitting that she and Elliot had killed LaFerrara for the sheer thrill of it. During a jailhouse interview with Newsweek in 2014, she claimed that she'd killed 22 other victims in at least 4 states. She said that she didn't regret a single one of the murders, and that she only killed people who truly deserved it. After investigating the claim, federal authorities don't seem to believe that Miranda killed 22 people or anywhere close to it. In fact, LaFerrara's death is the only killing she's been convicted of. In the end, both she and Elliot pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to life without parole. Number 11. Talis Bonds and Erin Tillman. Recent high school graduate Jack Lubel thought he was on his way to meet a woman at her house in Fraser, Tennessee during the Labor Day weekend in 2019. When he arrived at the residence, he texted his cousin saying that if he didn't call within a half hour, he should send help. A short while later, police were called to the scene, where they found Lubel dead from a gunshot wound with his vehicle still running. Someone had stolen his wallet, which contained less than $100 cash. 2 suspects were seen on surveillance footage near the scene, and investigators traced a burner phone number that the victim was communicating with to a young man named Talis Bonds. Law enforcement arrested Bonds and a second suspect, Erin Tillman, on suspicion of first-degree murder. Based on the conversations on Lubel's phone, it appeared as though the perpetrators posed as a woman online and lured him to the home. Prosecutors believe that Lubel fought back when the suspects robbed him, which resulted in one of them shooting him in the head. Bonds allegedly admitted to his role in the murder, and both he and Tillman were suspected of being responsible for several other recent robberies. Records now show that Talis Bonds and Erin Tillman are each serving 20-year sentences for second-degree murder. Number 10. Out of Control Orgy. 44-year-old Vishal Gohel was found bludgeoned to death inside his apartment in Hertfordshire, England, in early 2022 after a neighbor noticed that his front door was ajar. There was tape on his mouth and clear evidence of blunt force injuries to his head. An autopsy found that Gohel had suffered a brain injury, and damage to his voice box was consistent with someone who'd been choked. And several of the man's valuables were missing from the apartment, including his iPhone, Apple Watch, and cash. On the evening of his murder, Gohel was seen buying alcohol, soda, cigarettes, and some other items at a convenience store. He also withdrew £100 cash from an ATM and borrowed the same amount of money from his mother. A search of Gohel's phone showed that he'd been in contact with 22-year-old Yali Georgia Bruce Annan, who he'd found on Craigslist while seeking out a casual encounter. Per their agreement, Bruce Annan showed up at the apartment at around 1 a.m. with 22-year-old Faith Hoppy and 20-year-old Tiana Edwards Hancock for what Gohel thought was going to be an intimate group session. But about an hour and a half later, 3 men barged into the apartment, later identified as 22-year-old Sakeen Gordon, 23-year-old Tevin Leslie, and 22-year-old Brandon Brown. The trio allegedly carried out the merciless killing, which prosecutors would later accuse them of spending the entire day planning. Nobody called for help or tried helping Goel as he lay dying on the floor, yet the suspect took the time to try cleaning the crime scene. One suspect, Tiana Edwards Hancock, was acquitted of all charges, but 3 others, including Yali Georgia Bruce Anand, Tevin Leslie, and Sakeen Gordon, were convicted of murder and conspiracy to rob, while Brandon Brown and Faith Hoppe were also found guilty of conspiracy to rob, as well as manslaughter. Number 9. John Cosmetatos and Nicole Cross. In September 2014, a Syracuse, New York man named John Cosmetatos convinced his girlfriend Nicole Cross and another woman, Melissa Swift, to pose as prostitutes in a scheme to lure a victim to an abandoned house and steal his car. The unsuspecting target, 40-year-old Tony Lewis, took the bait and went to the vacant property where the 28-year-old suspect beat and stabbed him to death and then stole his Cadillac. Hours later, Cosmetatos unsuccessfully tried to burn a house down for someone who hired him to do the job. But when Plan A failed, he ended up robbing the victims at gunpoint before fleeing the scene. Several days after Lewis's body was found, police found Cosmetatos and Cross driving the stolen car in New York City. The pair were extradited to Syracuse, where they each initially faced a murder charge. Cosmetatos bargained with the prosecution with an offer to plead guilty and accept a life sentence if the state was willing to drop or reduce the murder charge against Cross. As a result of the agreement, Cross was convicted of armed robbery and was sentenced to 20 years. Melissa Swift also took a plea deal in exchange for her willingness to testify against Cosmetatos. In addition to admitting to Lewis's murder, Cosmetatos pleaded guilty to several other crimes, including the robbery and attempted arson he committed after killing Lewis. A month before the murder, Cosmetatos robbed and stabbed a man in Clay, New York. The victim survived, and Cosmetatos pleaded guilty to burglary. 2 days before that, he burglarized a church and stole a 55-inch TV, an iPhone, a GPS device, wristwatches, liquor, a wallet, and more. The convicted killer pleaded guilty to a separate burglary charge in that case. The judge overseeing the case imposed a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 22-year sentence, which will become effective if Cosmetatos somehow manages to successfully appeal his murder case. During his sentencing hearing, he refused to apologize and shamelessly announced that he was proud of his actions. Cosmetatos blamed Lewis for getting himself killed and told the court that he respects the man he sees when he looks in the mirror every day. But his version of events isn't exactly on point, according to the prosecution, who said that Lewis was a totally innocent victim. Number 8. Damarian Trammell Degrate. 3 men were hit by gunfire and one of them died in Waco, Texas over a several-hour span early one morning in August 2020. Police were quick to notice that all 3 victims had made plans to meet with the same person on the Grindr dating app. The first victim picked up the man he'd been talking to on Grindr, 20-year-old Damarian Trammell Degrate, and they drove to a home to buy drugs. He was waiting in the car when Degrate allegedly exited the residence at midnight and shot him point-blank in the chest. Despite his injuries, though, the victim managed to drive to a nearby gas station for help. Shortly after 2 a.m., police discovered the second victim, 23-year-old Jonathan Breeding, suffering from a gunshot wound inside his car, which had crashed into a pole. He was then rushed to a nearby hospital, where he died from his injuries. Degrate was charged with murder for the fatal shooting and attempted murder for one of the non-fatal shootings. He hasn't been charged in a third incident, which he remains a suspect in. According to prosecutors, Degrate was motivated by robbery. He spent nearly 3 years in jail on a $1 million bond before the case was finally scheduled for trial in 2023. And as part of a plea deal, Degrate admitted to murder and aggravated assault. He received a 40-year sentence and will become eligible for parole after serving 20 years. Number 7. Carla Jacqueline Morales. Jose Alfonso Villanueva thought he was meeting with Carla Jacqueline Morales in a dark remote field in Spring, Texas to celebrate his 24th birthday in 2018. He was expecting to smoke some marijuana and who knows what else, but none of that ended up happening. Upon arriving at the designated meeting place, he was confronted by 5 machete and gun-wielding MS-13 gang members who were intent on settling a score after Villanueva disrespected them in a rap battle. Villanueva had recently been laying low to avoid crossing paths with the gang, and he made a last-ditch effort to escape when he realized he'd been set up. He was shot and slashed as he tried to run away, and his body was found roughly a week later. Morales and the 5 gang members were all charged in connection with Villanueva's murder. During questioning, Morales told investigators that she'd tried persuading her co-conspirators not to follow through with the planned ambush, but she claimed that they told her it was too late. As her scheduled trial approached in October 2021, Morales cut off her ankle monitor and went on the run. She managed to evade law enforcement for 9 months before she was picked up and taken to jail to await a new trial date. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a 30-year prison sentence. Her accomplices have also been convicted and sentenced for their roles in the horrific crime. Number 6. Brandy Harris and Bradford Gunn. Shortly before 4 a.m. one morning in June of 2016, police in North Austin, Texas found 25-year-old Jose Angel Moreno dead in the middle of a street, riddled with bullet wounds with his motorcycle on top of him. While searching his phone, police found a series of text messages with Moreno's ex-girlfriend, 26-year-old Brandy Nicole Harris. The conversation contained messages from Harris to Moreno, asking him to meet in a strip mall parking lot after they'd initially made plans to meet at a hotel. Investigators asked Harris to come in for questioning and immediately noticed that she was driving a black SUV matching a witness description of a vehicle that was spotted at the murder scene. During the conversation, she allegedly admitted that her new boyfriend, 29-year-old Bradford Gunn, shot Moreno. When asked about a motive, Harris reportedly said that she was upset with Moreno for cheating on her and because he owed her money. Additionally, according to an affidavit, Gunn had become angry after overhearing Moreno tell Harris over the phone that he wanted to see her again. In the end, police charged Harris and Gunn with murder. Records show that Gunn was convicted of the charge and is serving a 40-year sentence, but the outcome of Brandy's case is unclear. Number 5. Cheyenne Brooks Brown and Tyrone Leftridge. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in June of 2021, 55-year-old Willie Lee Smith made plans to meet with a woman he connected with on a dating app. He believed he was going to see 24-year-old Cheyenne Brooks Brown in an alleyway outside her home in Flora, Indiana, but instead he walked into a deadly trap. Brooks Brown was at the meeting spot, but she wasn't there alone. 22-year-old Tyrone Leftridge was lying in wait with a baseball bat in his hands, waiting for the right moment to attack. Distracted by his conversation with Brooks Brown, Lee was caught off guard when Leftridge approached him from behind and struck him in the head twice with the bat. A short while later, a neighbor found Smith clinging to life on their sofa. He'd stumbled into their house in a desperate search for help and was covered in blood. The neighbor called the police and Willie was airlifted to the emergency room where he died from his injuries. Police were quick to connect the murder to Leftridge and Brooks Brown. During questioning, Brooks Brown said that Leftridge had used her dating account app to set up the meeting. It was her understanding that she was supposed to sleep with Smith for money, and she initially made it sound like she had no idea that Leftridge was going to attack the victim. Brooks Brown further claimed that when the assault began, she ran over to a neighbor's house and that Leftridge showed up a short while later with the victim's wallet, money, and cell phone. Leftridge also told a questionable story. At first, he admitted that he planned to rob Smith, but claimed that he was attacked by an unidentified mystery person. In a jailhouse phone call the next day, he told a friend that he struck Smith because the victim had a knife. Meanwhile, Brooks Brown told detectives that she didn't see any weapons in Smith's possession. She also admitted that he was polite toward her and didn't give any sort of reason for her or anyone else to act physically aggressive toward him. According to court documents, the suspect's housemate Jennifer Dean was also involved in the robbery plot. Dean allegedly provided the bat that was used to beat Smith and was expecting a $20 cut of the robbery proceeds. When Leftridge and Brooks Brown returned from the deadly assault, Brooks Brown told Dean to call the cops because a man got hurt. Dean allegedly refused and instead told her co-conspirators to clean up and destroy evidence. Both Leftridge, Brooks Brown, and Dean were all charged with murder. Records show that Leftridge was convicted of the charge and is serving a 45-year sentence, while Dean was also found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 60 years behind bars. Unfortunately, though, the outcome of the case for Brooks Brown is unclear. Number 4. Brianna Eadie. After connecting on a dating app in late 2023, a 35-year-old Florida man made plans to meet up with 24-year-old Brianna Eadie at an Orlando apartment complex. He picked the woman up late at night, and they drove to a nearby park, only to discover that it was closed. While driving back to the apartment building, the man noticed that Eadie was texting a lot, and she also took a phone call during the drive. When they arrived shortly before midnight, two suspicious-looking characters were standing outside, one of whom showed a gun and ordered the man out of his SUV. They proceeded to rob the man while Eadie allegedly stood nearby, seemingly unfazed by what was happening and like she was waiting for it to be done with. The thieves demanded the victim's car keys, ordered him to lie face down on the grass, and then drove off with Eadie in the car. Police identified Eadie as one of the suspects using photos from the dating app that the victim provided. She was booked into custody on a felony armed carjacking charge, while authorities remained tight-lipped on whether or not they'd caught the men involved. Number 3. Sydney Whitaker. While responding to a late-night call about a shooting in North Dallas, Texas in May of 2019, police found 21-year-old Adrian Wells dead from a gunshot wound at his apartment. According to an arrest warrant, 18-year-old Sydney Whitaker lured Wells outside on the promise of a specific favor, only for him to walk outside and come face-to-face with 3 armed intruders who forced him back inside. The suspects encountered 2 of Wells's friends who were watching TV on the second floor of the 3-story apartment and demanded cash at gunpoint. After realizing that there was another person present on the 3rd floor, one of the thieves began shooting, and unfortunately, one of the bullets fatally struck Wells, while another victim was critically wounded. A surviving witness told police that he thought something seemed off about Whitaker's desire to visit Wells for an intimate act because the two had just met for the first time the day before. He also said that Whitaker had been blowing up Wells's phone shortly before the robbery went wrong. 2 days after the shooting, Whitaker allegedly called the police and said that she had information about the incident. She agreed to stop by and speak with detectives, but failed to show up at the agreed-upon time. A relative of the young woman said that Whitaker had admitted to visiting Wells' apartment with 3 men, supposedly to buy marijuana. She claimed that she sat and waited in the car while her friends went inside. She also allegedly told the family member that she heard gunshots during that time. After the shooting broke out, a witness saw Whitaker running away from the property, and when the person asked if she was okay, she said no. He asked the young woman if she needed help, but she reportedly kept running without answering him. Whitaker was booked into custody on suspicion of capital murder, along with 2 of her alleged co-conspirators, 21-year-old Jaroy Rogers and 22-year-old Tyrone Williams. According to records, Whitaker is serving a 10-year sentence for aggravated robbery and assaulting a public servant. She'll become eligible for parole in 2024, but her projected release date is in 2029. Jaroy Rogers is serving a 17-year sentence for murder and will become eligible for parole in 2027. Tyrone Williams doesn't appear to be in custody, indicating that he was either found innocent or cooperated with the authorities in exchange for leniency. Number 2. Muhterem Perchikli. In anticipation of his upcoming move to Istanbul for a fresh start in 2023, 57-year-old British national Murat Arpapai turned to the internet to make new friends. It was here that he met Ersin Bazak, who owned a cafe that he became a regular at after moving to his new city. During one of Arpapai's visits to the cafe, he crossed paths with an attractive 19-year-old woman named Muhterem Perchikli. The two developed a friendship, and over time, it turned into a romantic connection. But one morning in July of 2023, locals discovered Arpapai's body hidden in a ventilation shaft of his rented apartment. His body bore no outward signs of injury or trauma, but because of the way it was concealed, police treated it as a suspicious death. An autopsy revealed that Arpapai's wrists had been bound, and there was an injection mark on his neck. Meanwhile, CCTV footage from the day of the suspected murder showed Arpapai and Perchikli entering the residence together, and a short while later, 3 men were seen entering the unit. During questioning, Perchikli allegedly implicated the cafe owner, Ersin Basak, as the mastermind of the plot. According to authorities, she admitted that Basak had sought her help with stealing Arpapay's money after he learned that Arpapay kept cash inside his apartment and that his family sent him money to live on. The three men who were seen entering the apartment were identified as Serpil Demir, Doğan Sarıldız, and Fatih Erginoğlu. Perchikli reportedly told police that the trio beat Arpapay unconscious and then killed him with an injection of a deadly substance. Then after the murder, Basak allegedly entered the apartment and stole Arpapay's money. Law enforcement apprehended Perchikli and Demir, who remain in custody. Erginoğlu and Sarıldız fled to Cyprus, while Basak is believed to be in the country of Georgia. So for now, the investigation appears to be ongoing. Number 1. Joanny da Silva Sampaio. In February 2021, a 19-year-old Brazilian influencer named Joanny da Silva Sampaio agreed to visit a man named Abel Landim at his luxury apartment in Teresina for an intimate encounter. As she distracted him in the shower, her boyfriend Francisco Moises Souza Batista Jr. and two accomplices kicked in the apartment door. Then, at a moment when Landim least expected it, the intruders ambushed him and zip-tied his wrists. Batista proceeded to beat Landim with a revolver while demanding to know where his valuables were. The victim resisted providing the information until a forced game of Russian roulette finally scared him into giving up the location of his things. In addition to stealing Landim's cash, camera, and other expensive belongings, the thieves forced him to give his banking passwords and drained his accounts. The criminals got distracted enough raiding the home for Landim to call the police, who arrived just in time to arrest Sampaio and Batista. Authorities also eventually captured the two other accomplices, Jean Carlos and Tiago Juan Martins de Sousa. During the court proceedings, the jury and judge heard about how Sampaio helped pull off the home invasion by tipping Batista off to the scheduled meeting time and opening the property's gates. All three of the men involved in the armed robbery were found guilty of their roles in the crime, and as a result, they were each sentenced to 20 years in prison. Sampaio was also convicted, and she received the harshest sentence of 23 years and 4 months.
Eight. Ashley Gaddy. In December of 2022, a man was arrested in the city of Cranebrook in Western Sydney for allegedly murdering soccer pioneer and teacher, 31-year-old Danielle Finlay Jones. The accused killer, 33-year-old Ashley Gaddy, was taken into custody after a lengthy 12-hour standoff with the police in the Blue Mountains. That night, Gaddy climbed his way to the top of a dangerous cliff at Fletcher's Lookout, but specially trained negotiators were able to talk him down off the ledge. The man was then arrested just after midnight. Finlay Jones and Gaddy connected on Tinder in late 2022. The two of them then met for the first time in person at the Marsden Brewhouse, which is located in Marsden Park. After having a few drinks and getting to know each other, the pair left the social scene and headed to a house in Cranebrook, about 12 miles, 20 kilometers away. Then, at around 2:30 p.m. the next day, friends of Finlay Jones found her unconscious at the residence with severe head injuries, but her date was nowhere to be found. Paramedics were called to the home, but they were too late, and the victim was pronounced dead upon their arrival. And according to the police, the woman may have lost her life a full 8 hours before her body was discovered. Luckily, the friends of Finlay Jones were introduced to Gaddy during their date, so they were easily able to identify the tattooed suspect. And after a 3-day investigation, Gaddy was arrested. The tradesman has since been charged with the murder, but he has yet to receive his sentence. 7. Robbery gone wrong. 3 people from Charleston, South Carolina have been accused of robbing and killing a man that one of them matched with on Tinder. On January 9, 2023, Zora Henderson and her 2 accomplices lured 24-year-old Alan Johnson III to an apartment in North Charleston with plans to rob the man. However, things got wildly out of control when Alan resisted, causing one of the suspects to fire multiple shots at the victim, ultimately killing him. The other 2 accomplices, 21-year-old Asherai Gadsden and 28-year-old Joshua Mack, have since been charged with murder. But according to state lawyers, Zora Henderson wasn't in the room when Allen was shot, and therefore couldn't be held responsible for his death. Zora entered an Alford plea, which means that she doesn't accept guilt, but knows that the state has evidence against her that could lead to a conviction if the case were to go to trial. Apparently, while Joshua and Asherai were carrying out the armed robbery, Zora waited in another room or outside, it isn't clear, and communicated via text with her co-conspirators. However, the text messages only showed plans for the robbery, proving that the shooting was unexpected and wasn't meant to happen. All three suspects are currently waiting for their sentencing hearings. Joshua and Asherai are facing murder and armed robbery charges, but Zora's murder charge was dropped after agreeing to cooperate with the state. So at the moment, the outcome of the case is unclear. 6. WhatsApp nightmare. A woman from Massachusetts who was attending college in the Netherlands was stabbed to death in March of 2022. The alleged 27-year-old killer, who's only known as Thomas R., apparently met the woman on Tinder and had been stalking her for weeks before carrying out the gruesome murder. 21-year-old Miek Oort's body was discovered by Dutch police at the woman's apartment in Leeuwarden. In addition to the murder victim, 2 other injured individuals were discovered inside the building, but they weren't named. The authorities responded to the home at around 3:36 a.m. on a Sunday after receiving a call about a fire inside the apartment. Luckily, Oort had confided in her ex-boyfriend, Michael, after connecting with the suspect on Tinder. But when Oort and Michael debated on whether or not they should get back together, Thomas R. grew jealous of their relationship and started to stalk the woman. Thomas apparently drove up and down Oort's street to check on her whereabouts, and he even harassed her on WhatsApp. And according to the victim's sister, he also placed a tracking device on the woman's bicycle. On the day of the murder, Thomas allegedly tossed a device that was designed to cause fires into the building, in an attempt to force people outside. Then, while everyone was distracted, he snuck into the apartment and stabbed Oort to death. Afterward, Thomas tried to flee and began heading to Germany in his vehicle. But he made the mistake of calling his parents, who ended up calling the police. The authorities then caught up with the killer near the German border, where he was arrested for the crime. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on the case since March 2022, so it's not clear what punishment Thomas R. received. 5. Zachary Kent Mills. On December 30th, 2022, a 21-year-old Texas man was arrested after he allegedly kidnapped a woman he'd met on the dating app called Bumble. The suspect, Zachary Kent Mills, is said to have held the woman captive for about 5 days. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted and brutalized her. And according to court documents, Mills had since been charged with aggravated kidnapping. On the 29th of December, deputies with the Harris County Constable's Office responded to an emergency call about a female patient at the Houston Methodist Spring Emergency Care Center who'd been the victim of an assault. The victim, who was only identified as JW, told investigators that she'd met Mills on the dating app and that the two of them began a romantic relationship. On Christmas Eve, JW said she agreed to go to the man's apartment, but as soon as she entered, Mills tried to initiate sexual intercourse with her. When she turned down his advances, though, the man physically assaulted her and forced her to remain inside the residence. The victim was subjected to horrible abuse by her captor. According to the affidavit, JW was hit several times with Mills' open fist. The defendant also bit the woman on the face and neck and struck her with the handle of a screwdriver when he got tired of using his hands. The victim told investigators that she'd tried multiple times to escape, but every time she did, Mills stopped her and punished her for it. JW also claimed that during her time with Mills, he refused to give her any food or water. Luckily, though, the woman managed to get out of the home when her captor left the residence to visit his father's house. This allowed JW to flee, and she spoke to the first person she came into contact with and told them what had happened to her. She was then taken to the hospital to be treated for her injuries, including bite marks, cuts to both her nose and throat, and severe bruising to both of her eyes and the rest of her body. JW was able to identify Mills as her attacker based on the man's Texas driver's license photo. And the next day, he was taken into custody and was booked into the Harris County Jail. Surprisingly, Mills was released after posting his $50,000 bond. But he's currently on house arrest while his case works its way through the court system. 4. Missing mother. In early 2023, a Michigan mother of 3 was reported missing after she'd left her home to meet up with a man she connected with online. 39-year-old Lynn Kim packed a bag and took off on New Year's Eve to meet with Joey, the guy she'd met on Meet Me, a social networking and online dating service. The pediatric medical assistant reportedly left her 3 children behind when she went to see this man. Shannon Christian, Kim's cousin, told Fox 2 that she'd been trying to track the woman down. She also claimed that after Kim met Joey online, she started cutting people out of her life. And according to her, Kim's social media accounts have all been deactivated. The last time anyone spoke with Kim was on January 4th, 2023, when the woman's friend, Charlene Gilbert, managed to get into contact with her. Gilbert claims that throughout the entire call, Joey could be heard in the background cursing at her over the phone. Then, when Gilbert called Kim again later that same day, Joey answered and said, "You're never going to find her. We're in California." This conversation understandably caused concern with the woman's friends and family, who all just want her to safely return home to be with her 2 sons and daughter. But Gilbert says that Kim has failed to pay any of her bills, and that her phone seems to be disconnected. Kim's ex-husband, Nicholas Anderson, spoke with news outlets and explained that Kim moved in with him and their kids the year before her disappearance, when he was battling cancer and undergoing treatment. Anderson further stated that Kim spent a lot of time on the phone with Joey during this time, and that the man wore a gold chain and a baseball hat. He also claimed that Joey was abusive, adding that the man wanted the woman's kids to stay out of her bedroom. Apparently, the once loving mother changed completely after meeting Joey, and to Anderson, it seemed like she was brainwashed. A missing persons report was eventually filed in Clinton Township, where Kim and her 3 children live, or lived. The woman's kids are safe and staying with relatives, but Kim hasn't reached out to any of her family or friends since early January 2023. Fox 2 confirmed later with Clinton Township Police Department that they'd made contact with Kim and that she was safe. But no other information has been released about the case. Sadly, based on reports about Joey, who is apparently from the Bronx in New York, he seems to be abusive, and Kim may be scared to leave him. However, there is nothing the police can do if a victim of domestic abuse refuses to come forward. So for now, Kim's children are still waiting for their mother to come home. 3. Change of plans. On August 19th, 2016, a man was shot to death at his home in Auburndale, Florida, after connecting with a younger 19-year-old woman on Plenty of Fish, a popular dating site and app. 27-year-old Adam Hillary was the victim of a scheme concocted by the woman he met online and 3 other individuals. According to Andy Ray, Auburndale Police Deputy Chief, the plan was likely to rob Hillary and take his stuff, but obviously things turned out a lot differently. On August 18th, Hillary went out on a date with the woman from Plenty of Fish, and afterward, the 2 of them went back to Hillary's house to hang out. The woman didn't stay the night though, and was dropped off at her home later that night. But the police reported that hours later, the woman and her 3 male accomplices returned to Hillary's residence to carry out the robbery. However, when a struggle occurred between Hillary and one of the male suspects, things got out of hand, and the attempted robbery turned into murder when Hillary was shot in the head. Sadly, Hillary left behind his 5-year-old daughter, who will now have to grow up without a father. In 2020, the woman and men responsible for the crime were identified as Haley Rose Bustos, Andre Warner, Joshua Ellington, and Gary Gray. Bustos reluctantly implicated her 3 co-conspirators in order to avoid receiving a life sentence in jail for the crime. Warner was named by the woman as the one who pulled the trigger and ultimately killed Hillary. So he was charged with first-degree murder and was found guilty of the crime by a 12-member jury, who recommended that Warner be sentenced to death. Ellington, Gray, Warner, and Bustos were all charged with robbery with a firearm, burglary with a weapon, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery, although Warner received the additional charge of murder. Bustos received 25 years in prison, but sentencing remains unclear for Ellington and Gray. Warner faces the death penalty for his involvement in the robbery gone wrong, but whether or not this punishment will be upheld remains to be seen. 2. Canine Kidnapper. Have you ever gone on a date that you wish you hadn't? Well, this is exactly how an 18-year-old woman felt after inviting a Tinder date to a home where she was dog-sitting in August 2017. The man apparently arrived at the home in Leonia, New Jersey with one of his friends who wasn't invited. The teen claimed that she was distracted by one of these men, causing her to be oblivious to the robbery that was taking place right under her nose. After the men left, the woman noticed that several things were missing around the house, including Maggie, the 2-year-old white Maltese she was supposed to be watching. The unidentified 18-year-old then reported the missing pooch and robbery to the police. Luckily, Maggie was spotted walking along the street in the city of Garfield, which is about a 20-minute drive from Leonia. The canine was then handed over to the All-Humane Animal Rescue, who helped to reunite Maggie with her worried family. The suspects were identified by the authorities, but it's not clear if they were brought to justice or not. After this dog napping, the local police reminded the public not to share personal or financial information with individuals online, which should be a given, but apparently not. 1. Chance Seneca. 21-year-old Chance Seneca from Louisiana pleaded guilty to kidnapping charges in September of 2022 in relation to an incident that occurred 2 years earlier in June 2020. Seneca had matched with a gay teenager on the queer dating app Grindr with the sole intention of killing him and dismembering his body. Although the victim, Holden White, survived the ordeal, the gruesome attack left him in a coma for a full 3 days. And within that same week of assaulting White, Seneca tried to kidnap a different man and even succeeded in abducting another, according to a statement from the FBI. White and Seneca were both teenagers when they met on the popular LGBTQ app in May 2020. And after a month of talking to one another, they decided to meet up in person. The pair agreed to meet at Seneca's father's house, but after some small talk, Seneca pulled White backward with a cord that he'd wrapped around his neck, choking him so severely that all the blood vessels in White's face ruptured. And after that, White lost consciousness. Seneca then dialed 911 and confessed the crime to the dispatcher. Although at the time, Seneca believed White was already dead. This move was made by the man in an attempt to be placed in a mental institution, according to an affidavit that was released in 2021. When police arrived at the scene, Seneca was arrested and charged with attempted second-degree murder. And in January 2023, he was sentenced to serve more than 42 years in federal prison for the crime.